Chapter 1. You've been taught something your entire life that quietly destroyed your power. Put others first. Be nice, be humble, be available, be understanding, be patient, and slowly, without realizing it, you became optional in your own life. You started prioritizing people who would replace you in a second. You gave time to those who never respected it. You lowered your standards just to keep temporary connections alive. You smiled when you were disrespected. You stayed silent when you should have walked away, and the worst part is, you called it kindness. But let's be brutally honest, that wasn't kindness. That was a lack of self-value disguised as virtue. People who truly value themselves don't beg for attention. They don't chase validation. They don't tolerate disrespect just to avoid loneliness. They understand one fundamental psychological truth. The world treats you exactly how you teach it to treat you. If you constantly sacrifice your boundaries, people will expect access. If you always say yes, your no will lose meaning. If you never walk away, nobody fears losing you. And that's where everything begins to collapse. Because once people realize you won't leave, they stop trying to keep you. This is where your transformation starts. Not with motivation, not with discipline, not with productivity hacks. It starts with one uncomfortable realization. You have been undervaluing yourself. Think about it. The way you talk to yourself, the way you tolerate behavior from others, the way you ignore your own needs just to maintain peace. That's not strength. That's self-abandonment. And psychologically, when you abandon yourself, others follow. Because human behavior is simple at its core. People take cues from you. Your energy, your standards, your boundaries, they all signal how you should be treated. If you act like you're easily replaceable, people will replace you. If you act like your time is cheap, people will waste it. If you act like your presence is ordinary, nobody will see it as valuable. So the real question is not why people don't value you. The real question is why you don't. There's a concept in psychology called self-perception theory. It explains that people form beliefs about themselves by observing their own behavior. In simple words, your brain watches what you do and then decides who you are. If you constantly overextend for others, your brain concludes that others are more important than you. If you stay in situations that drain you, your brain concludes that you deserve less. If you ignore your own needs, your brain learns that your needs don't matter. And once that belief is formed, it becomes your identity. That's why you feel stuck. That's why you feel unappreciated. That's why you feel like no matter what you do, it's never enough. Because at a deeper level, you've programmed yourself to accept less. But here's where things get interesting. This can be reversed, not by affirmations, not by pretending confidence, not by posting quotes online. It changes through behavior. When you start valuing your time, your brain updates your worth. When you start saying no, your identity shifts. When you walk away from disrespect, your self-image rebuilds. And suddenly, something powerful happens. People start reacting differently. Not because they changed, but because you did. You see, value is not something you demand. It's something you demonstrate. And most people get this completely wrong. They try to convince others to treat them better. They explain, argue, justify, and hope people will understand their worth. But value doesn't come from explanation. It comes from standards. High-value individuals don't argue their importance. They embody it. They don't chase attention. Attention naturally moves toward them. They don't fear losing people. They fear losing themselves. And that's the mindset shift you need. Because right now, your biggest fear is being alone. But the truth is, you're already alone in the worst way possible. You're disconnected from yourself. You ignore your instincts. You silence your voice. You compromise your standards just to stay accepted. That's not connection, that's survival. And survival mode will never lead you to a high-value life. You need to move from survival to self-respect. And that begins with one decision. You stop negotiating your worth. Not sometimes, not when it's convenient, not when you feel strong, always. You don't accept half effort from people who expect your full energy. You don't stay where you're tolerated when you deserve to be appreciated. You don't explain your boundaries to people who benefit from you having none. And most importantly, you stop trying to be liked by everyone. Because the moment you try to be liked by everyone, you become respected by no one. This is uncomfortable. You will lose people. You will disappoint others. You will feel guilt. But understand this clearly. Guilt is not always a sign of doing something wrong. Sometimes it's a sign that you're finally putting yourself first. And your mind isn't used to it. Let it feel uncomfortable. Growth is not supposed to feel safe. This is the price of becoming someone who values themselves. And once you cross this line, everything changes. Your standards rise. Your energy becomes selective. Your presence becomes rare. And rare things are always valued. So, from this moment forward, you make a quiet decision. You are no longer available at the cost of yourself. You are no longer sacrificing your peace to keep others comfortable. You are no longer shrinking just to fit into spaces that don't deserve you, because your life doesn't improve when people start valuing you. It improves when you do. Chapter 2. There is a moment in every person's life when they start noticing a pattern they can't ignore anymore. People don't take them seriously. Their efforts go unnoticed. Their kindness gets overlooked. Their presence feels optional. And no matter how much more they give, nothing changes. If anything, it gets worse. This is the point where frustration begins to grow, but confusion grows even faster, because from the outside, it doesn't make sense. You're doing everything right. You're being supportive, available, understanding. So why does it feel like you're being treated as if you don't matter? The answer is not comfortable, but it is precise. Respect is not given based on how much you give. It is given based on how you position yourself. And most people unknowingly position themselves at the bottom without realizing it, not through big, obvious mistakes, but through small, repeated behaviors that signal low value over time. These behaviors are subtle. They feel normal. In fact, society often rewards them in the short term, but psychologically they erode how others perceive you. One of the most damaging behaviors is over-availability. Being constantly accessible might feel like loyalty, but it communicates something entirely different. It tells people that your time is not limited, and anything that is not limited is not valued. Think about it in simple terms. Rare things are respected. Scarce things are desired. But when you are always there, always ready, always responding, you remove any sense of scarcity from your presence. You become predictable, and predictability in excess leads to being taken for granted. Another silent destroyer of respect is the inability to say no. Every time you say yes to something that drains you, you are subconsciously telling both yourself and others that your boundaries are flexible. And once people learn that your boundaries can be bent, they will continue bending them. Not always out of malice, but because human behavior naturally moves toward ease. If you make it easy for people to take from you, they will. Not because they are bad, but because you have made it normal. Then there is the habit of over-explaining. This one is deeply psychological. When you feel the need to justify your decisions excessively, you are signaling uncertainty in your own authority. High-value individuals do not feel the need to convince others of their choices. They state and they move. But when you explain too much, defend too much, or seek too much approval, you shift the power dynamic. You place yourself in a position where others feel entitled to judge your decisions, and once that dynamic is established, it becomes difficult to reverse. There is also a pattern that many people overlook completely: tolerating small acts of disrespect. Not the obvious ones, but the subtle ones, the delayed replies, the dismissive tone, the broken promises, the lack of effort. Each of these may seem insignificant on its own, but together they create a narrative. A narrative that says you will tolerate being treated as an option. And once that narrative is formed, it becomes your identity in the eyes of others. The mind works through patterns. It observes behavior and builds expectations. If someone cancels on you multiple times and you still show up the next time without hesitation, the mind registers that as acceptable. If someone speaks to you in a way that undermines your value and you respond with silence or nervous laughter, the mind records that as permission. Over time, these patterns solidify, and what started as small compromises becomes a fixed perception. Another critical factor is emotional dependency. When your sense of worth becomes tied to how others treat you, you lose control over your own value. You start seeking validation instead of embodying confidence. You begin adjusting your behavior based on reactions rather than principles. And this creates instability, because now your identity is no longer self-defined. It is externally controlled, and people can sense this, even if they cannot articulate it. They feel the imbalance, and they respond to it. Confidence, in its true form, is not loud. It is not aggressive. It is not about proving anything. It is quiet certainty. It is the ability to stand firm in your decisions without needing approval. And this is where many people get it wrong. They think becoming high value means becoming dominant or intimidating. But that is not sustainable. True value is not forced. It is established through consistency in how you treat yourself, consistency in what you accept and what you reject, consistency in your standards regardless of who is in front of you. Because the moment your standards change based on the person, your value becomes negotiable, and negotiable value is never respected long-term. There is also an important distinction to understand between kindness and self-respect. Kindness is giving without expecting anything in return. Self-respect is knowing when to stop giving. Most people confuse the two. They believe that being endlessly giving makes them a good person. But without boundaries, kindness becomes self-destruction. And people do not respect what destroys itself for their comfort. Let's go deeper into the psychology of it. Humans are wired to assess value based on effort and resistance. If something requires effort to maintain, it is perceived as valuable. If something is easily available, it is perceived as replaceable. This is not about manipulation. It is about perception, and perception shapes reality in social dynamics. When you start setting boundaries, something interesting happens. At first, people resist. They question the change. They may even react negatively. Not because you are wrong, but because you are disrupting a pattern they benefited from. This is where most people fail. They interpret resistance as a sign that they are doing something wrong, and they revert back to their old behavior. But resistance is not a sign to stop. It is a sign that the dynamic is shifting. If you hold your ground consistently, the same people who resisted will start adjusting. They will recalibrate their expectations, And over time, they will begin to treat you differently. Not because you asked them to, but because you showed them how to. And some people will leave. This is inevitable. When you raise your standards, not everyone will qualify to stay in your life. And that is not a loss. It is filtration. It is the process of removing what does not align with your value. You have to understand this clearly. Not everyone deserves access to you. Not everyone deserves your time, your energy, your attention. These are limited resources, and the way you distribute them determines your quality of life. There is a powerful shift that happens when you stop trying to be accepted and start deciding who you accept. It changes everything. Your conversations become different. Your relationships become intentional. Your energy becomes focused. You stop chasing. You start choosing. And that is where respect begins. Because people respect those who respect themselves, not in words, but in actions, in decisions, in standards that are not compromised under pressure. So if you feel like people are not valuing you, do not rush to blame them. Step back and observe your own patterns. Where are you overgiving? Where are you undervaluing your time? Where are you tolerating what you should be rejecting? These answers will not always be comfortable, but they will always be accurate, and once you see them, you cannot unsee them. That awareness is your turning point, because now you have a choice. You can continue repeating the same patterns and getting the same results, or you can start making small, deliberate changes. Say no when you mean no. Step back when something feels off. Stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. And, most importantly, start treating your own time and energy as something valuable. Because until you do that, no one else will. This is not about becoming cold. It is not about pushing people away. It is about creating a standard that filters who gets to stay. And once that standard is in place, everything becomes clearer. You no longer feel confused about where you stand with people. You no longer feel drained by interactions. You no longer feel the need to prove your worth. Because your worth is no longer something you are trying to earn. It is something you have decided. And that decision changes everything. Chapter 3. At some point you realize that changing how people treat you is not enough. Because even if the external world adjusts, something inside you still feels unstable. You still overthink. You still seek reassurance. You still feel the urge to explain, to prove, to be accepted. And that is because the real problem was never outside. It was internal. It was the way you see yourself when no one is watching. Self-worth is not built in public. It is built in private. In the moments where you choose discipline over distraction. In the moments where you keep your word to yourself. In the moments where you walk away from something that feels good temporarily but costs you long-term. This is where identity is shaped, not through what you say, but through what you repeatedly do. Most people try to increase their value by changing appearance, improving communication, or becoming more productive. And while those things can help, they are surface level. They do not address the core issue, because at the center of everything is a simple question your mind is constantly trying to answer. Can I trust myself? If the answer is no, nothing else will feel stable. You can gain respect from others, but you won't believe it. You can achieve success, but it won't feel enough. You can build relationships, but you will constantly fear losing them, because deep down you know you have a pattern of abandoning yourself. And that is what needs to change. Trust in yourself is built through evidence. Not motivation, not emotion. Evidence. Every time you say you will do something and actually do it, you create a piece of evidence. Every time you resist an urge that weakens you, you create another piece. Every time you choose long-term respect over short-term comfort, you strengthen that foundation. Over time, these small actions compound, and something powerful begins to form. A quiet confidence, not the kind that needs to be seen, but the kind that is felt. You stop doubting every decision. You stop second-guessing your worth. You stop needing constant reassurance, because now your identity is backed by proof. There is a psychological principle known as cognitive dissonance. It occurs when your actions and your beliefs are not aligned. And your mind does not like that tension. It will either change your beliefs to match your actions or your actions to match your beliefs. Most people unknowingly lower their beliefs. They act in ways that diminish their value, and instead of changing their behavior, they adjust their identity to justify it. They tell themselves they are not good enough, not strong enough, not worthy enough, and this becomes their reality. But you can use this principle in reverse. You can start acting like someone who values themselves even before you fully believe it. And over time, your mind will adjust your identity to match your actions. This is how real transformation happens. Not by waiting to feel confident, but by behaving in alignment with confidence until it becomes natural. That means you start making decisions that a high-value version of you would make. You wake up when you said you would, even when you don't feel like it. You stop engaging in conversations that drain you. You distance yourself from environments that weaken your focus. You invest time in things that build you, not just entertain you. At first, this feels unnatural because it is unfamiliar. Your mind will resist it. It will try to pull you back into comfort, into old habits, into familiar patterns that feel safe but keep you stuck. This resistance is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that you are changing. And change always creates friction. The difference between people who evolve and those who stay the same is simple. One group pushes through that friction, the other retreats back into comfort. If you want to become someone who truly values themselves, you have to get comfortable with discomfort. You have to understand that growth will not feel good in the moment. It will feel like effort. It will feel like discipline. It will feel like saying no when it would be easier to say yes. But on the other side of that discomfort is something most people never experience. Control, not control over others, but control over yourself. And that is the highest form of power. Because once you control your actions, your impulses, your decisions, you are no longer easily influenced. You are no longer reactive. You are no longer dependent on external validation. You become stable. And stability is attractive. It draws respect without effort. There is also a shift that happens in how you handle emotions. Instead of being controlled by them, you start observing them. You feel the urge to respond immediately, but you pause. You feel the need to prove yourself, but you stay silent. You feel the pull to go back to what is familiar, but you choose differently. This pause is powerful, because in that pause you break the cycle. You stop repeating the same patterns that kept you stuck. And once you break the cycle enough times, it loses its control over you. Another important element in building self-worth is solitude. Not isolation, but intentional time alone. Because when you are constantly surrounded by noise, opinions, and distractions, you lose connection with your own thoughts. You start living based on reactions instead of intentions. But when you spend time alone, you begin to hear yourself again. You start understanding what you actually want, what you actually value, what you are no longer willing to tolerate. This clarity is essential. Because without clarity, you will continue adapting to other people's expectations. And adaptation without awareness leads to losing yourself. High-value individuals are not easily influenced, not because they are rigid, but because they are clear. They know who they are, they know what they stand for, and they do not compromise that for temporary acceptance. This does not mean they are perfect. It means they are aligned. And alignment creates confidence that cannot be faked. At this stage, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. You stop seeking attention and you start attracting it. Not because you are trying to be noticed, but because your energy changes. You are no longer chasing approval. You are no longer adjusting to be liked. You are simply being. And that authenticity is rare. People notice it. They may not understand it, but they feel it, and they respond to it. But this is not the goal. The goal is not attention. The goal is self-respect, because attention without self-respect leads to dependency. But self-respect without attention still leads to peace, and peace is far more valuable. There will still be moments where you doubt yourself, moments where old patterns try to return, moments where you feel the urge to go back to who you used to be. That is normal. Growth is not linear, but the difference now is awareness. You catch yourself earlier, you correct yourself faster. You don't stay stuck as long, and over time, those moments become less frequent. Until one day, you realize something has changed. You no longer feel the need to prove your worth. You no longer tolerate what once felt normal. You no longer question your value in every situation. Because now, your value is not something you are trying to build. It is something you have embodied. And once you reach this point, everything external becomes easier. Boundaries become natural. Decisions become clear. Relationships become healthier. Because they are no longer built on insecurity. They are built on self-respect. And that changes everything. Chapter 4. There is a level of power that does not come from words, achievements, or even visible confidence. It comes from something far more subtle, yet far more influential. It is your presence. The way you carry yourself. The energy you bring into a room. The way people feel when you are around them, even before you say a single word. Most people underestimate this completely. They think influence is about speaking more, explaining more, proving more. But the truth is the opposite. The more you try to prove, the less power you hold. Real value is felt, not announced. You've probably experienced this without realizing it. You meet someone who doesn't talk much, yet their presence is undeniable. They are calm, composed, and completely in control of themselves. They don't rush to fill silence. They don't react impulsively. And somehow, without effort, they command respect. That is not accidental, that is cultivated. And it comes from one core principle. They are not seeking anything from the moment. They are not trying to impress. They are not trying to be accepted. They are simply grounded in who they are. When you stop seeking validation, your energy changes immediately. There is less tension in your behavior, less urgency in your responses, less need to control how others perceive you, and that absence of need creates strength. Because neediness, even in subtle forms, weakens your presence. People can sense it. The way you wait for replies, the way you adjust your tone based on reactions, the way you over-engage when someone gives you attention. These are all signals of dependency. And dependency reduces perceived value. High-value presence is built on detachment. Not emotional coldness, but emotional control. The ability to engage without becoming dependent on the outcome. You can have a conversation without needing approval. You can express yourself without needing agreement. You can walk away without needing closure. This level of detachment creates stability. And stability is rare. Most people are reactive. They are controlled by what happens around them. Their mood changes based on responses. Their confidence fluctuates based on attention. But when you are stable, you become unpredictable in the best way. Not because you are inconsistent, but because you are not easily influenced. Silence plays a critical role in this. Most people fear silence. They rush to fill it because it feels uncomfortable. But silence is not empty. It is powerful. It creates space. It shifts attention. It allows you to observe instead of react. When you are comfortable with silence, you immediately stand out. Because now you are not competing for attention. You are controlling it. You speak when it adds value, not when it fills space, and that makes your words carry weight. Think about conversations where someone talks too much. They explain every detail, justify every point, respond instantly to everything. Over time, their words lose impact because there is no pause, no restraint, no selectivity. But when someone speaks less, and only when necessary, every word becomes more significant. People listen more carefully. They pay attention. They assign importance. This is not manipulation. This is perception shaped by behavior. Another key aspect of presence is emotional regulation. This is where most people lose their power without realizing it. The moment you react impulsively, you give control away. If someone can trigger you easily, they control your emotional state. And if they control your emotional state, they control the dynamic. High-value individuals do not allow this. Not because they don't feel emotions, but because they don't let emotions dictate their actions. When something provokes you, there is always a gap between the stimulus and your response. Most people ignore that gap. They react instantly. But if you learn to pause in that moment, even for a few seconds, you regain control. You choose your response instead of defaulting to a reaction. And that choice changes everything. It shifts the power back to you. This applies in every situation: disrespect, criticism, pressure, conflict. If you react emotionally, you lower your position. If you respond calmly, you elevate it. Not because you are suppressing yourself, but because you are choosing how to engage. And choice is power. There is also something important about how you carry your attention. Where your focus goes determines your energy. If you are constantly focused on others, what they think, how they respond, how they perceive you, your energy becomes scattered. You lose center. But when your attention is internal, when you are aware of your own state, your own behavior, your own standards, you become grounded. Grounded individuals are not easily shaken. They don't get pulled into unnecessary drama. They don't engage in every conversation. They don't feel the need to respond to everything. They choose where to invest their energy. And that selectivity increases their value, because attention is one of the most valuable resources you have. And when you give it too freely, it loses significance. There is a misconception that being high value means being distant or unapproachable. That is not accurate. It means being intentional. You can be warm, engaging, and respectful while still maintaining boundaries. The difference is you are not available to everyone in the same way. You don't give equal access to everyone. You observe, you assess, and you decide. This brings us to another important shift. You stop trying to be interesting and you become interested in the right things. Instead of performing for attention, you engage with purpose. You listen more than you speak. You observe patterns. You understand dynamics. And this awareness gives you an advantage, because most people are too busy trying to be seen to actually see what is happening around them. Presence is also influenced by how comfortable you are with yourself. If you are constantly trying to adjust, impress, or fit in, your energy becomes unstable. But when you are comfortable being yourself, even in silence, even without attention, you project confidence naturally, not forced, not exaggerated, just stable. And stability is what people trust. When people trust your stability, they respect your presence. Because they know you are not easily influenced. You are not reactive. You are not dependent on external validation, and that makes your behavior consistent. Predictable in values, but not in reactions, and that combination is powerful. There will be moments where you feel the urge to go back to old patterns, to over-explain, to react quickly, to seek validation. That urge does not disappear immediately, but the difference now is awareness. You notice it, and in that moment you have a choice. You can follow the old pattern, or you can choose differently. Each time you choose differently, you reinforce a new identity. Someone who is in control, someone who does not need to prove anything. Someone whose presence speaks before they do. This is not about becoming silent or distant. It is about becoming intentional, speaking with purpose, acting with awareness, engaging with control. And once you reach this level, something shifts in how people respond to you. They listen more. They respect your time more. They think twice before crossing boundaries. Not because you demanded it, but because your presence communicates it. That is the highest level of value. Not forced, not explained. Felt. And once your value is felt, you don't need to convince anyone of it. Chapter 5. There is a hidden force that controls most people's decisions, emotions, and behaviors without them even realizing it. It is not fear. It is not weakness. It is attachment. Attachment to outcomes. Attachment to people. Attachment to being accepted, understood, chosen, validated. And the stronger this attachment becomes, the weaker your position gets. Because the moment you need a specific outcome, you lose control over yourself. Think about it carefully. The moment you want someone to like you, you start adjusting your behavior. You become more agreeable, more available, less honest. You begin filtering your words, softening your opinions, hiding parts of yourself just to maintain approval, and without realizing it, you start losing authenticity. The same applies to every area of life. When you're attached to a result, whether it is a response, an opportunity, or a relationship, your focus shifts from being in control to trying to control the outcome. And that shift creates pressure. It creates anxiety. It creates overthinking. You start analyzing every detail, every message, every interaction. You question what you said, how you said it, what they meant, what will happen next. Your mind becomes restless because it is trying to predict and control something that is not fully in your hands. And this is where most people suffer, not because of reality, but because of their attachment to a specific version of reality. Detachment is not about not caring, it is about not depending. There is a critical difference. When you care, you are engaged. You are present. You give your energy to something. But when you depend, your emotional state becomes tied to the outcome. You no longer control how you feel. The result controls it for you. High-value individuals care deeply, but they do not depend. They invest, but they are not attached. They engage, but they are not consumed. And this creates a level of emotional freedom that most people never experience. Because now, your actions are not driven by fear of losing something. They are driven by choice. When you detach from outcomes, something powerful happens. You start performing better. You communicate more clearly. You make decisions faster, because now there is no pressure to force a specific result. You are simply acting in alignment with your standards. This is why people who appear to care less often have more control. It is not that they don't value things, it is that they are not emotionally dependent on them. And that independence creates strength. Let's take relationships as an example. If you are attached to someone staying in your life at any cost, you will tolerate behavior you shouldn't. You will ignore red flags. You will compromise your standards just to keep them, and in doing so, you lower your own value. But when you are detached, your mindset changes completely. You still appreciate the person. You still invest in the connection, but you are not afraid of losing it. And because you are not afraid, you act differently. You set boundaries. You walk away from disrespect. You communicate honestly. And paradoxically, this makes people value you more, because people respect what is not easily controlled. Detachment also protects your mental clarity. When you are not obsessed with outcomes, your mind becomes quieter. You stop replaying conversations. You stop imagining scenarios. You stop trying to decode every action. Instead, you focus on what is within your control. Your behavior, your decisions, your standards. And that focus increases your effectiveness. There is a concept in psychology known as locus of control. It refers to where you believe control exists in your life. People with an external locus of control believe their life is shaped by outside factors. Other people, circumstances, outcomes. And because of this, they feel powerless when things don't go their way. But people with an internal locus of control focus on what they can control. Their actions, their responses, their mindset, and this gives them stability, even in uncertain situations. Detachment strengthens your internal locus of control, because you stop focusing on what you cannot control. You stop trying to manage other people's perceptions. You stop trying to guarantee outcomes. And instead, you focus on executing your role with clarity. There is also a deeper level to this. Detachment removes fear, fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of loss. Because once you accept that outcomes are not fully in your control, you stop fearing them. You understand that your value is not defined by whether something works out or not. It is defined by how you show up, and this changes your entire approach to life. You take more risks. You express yourself more freely. You stop holding back, because now there is no pressure to secure a specific result. You are simply acting in alignment with who you are. This is where confidence becomes natural, not forced, not practiced, but automatic, because confidence is not built by controlling outcomes. It is built by trusting yourself regardless of outcomes, and that trust comes from detachment. There is also a shift in how you handle rejection. Instead of taking it personally, you see it objectively. Not everything is meant for you. Not every person will align with you. Not every opportunity will work out. And that is not a reflection of your worth. It is a matter of compatibility. When you understand this, rejection loses its emotional weight. It becomes information, not validation, and that perspective allows you to move forward without hesitation. Another important aspect is patience. When you are attached, you become impatient. You want results immediately. You want clarity now. You want certainty, and that urgency leads to poor decisions. But when you are detached, you are patient. You allow things to unfold. You observe, you wait. Not passively, but strategically, because you understand that forcing outcomes often leads to weaker results. This patience gives you an advantage. While others rush, you remain composed. While others react, you respond. While others chase, you attract. And that difference becomes visible over time. Detachment also changes how you handle success. You don't become overly attached to positive outcomes either. You don't rely on them for your identity. You appreciate them, but you don't depend on them. This keeps you balanced. Because both success and failure are temporary. And when your identity is not tied to either, you remain stable. This stability is rare, and rare qualities are always valued. At this stage, you begin to operate differently from most people. You are not driven by urgency. You are not controlled by fear. You are not dependent on validation. You are focused. You are grounded. You are in control. And that control is not about dominating others. It is about mastering yourself. There will still be moments where attachment tries to pull you back. Moments where you want a specific outcome so badly that you feel the urge to control everything. That is normal. But now you recognize it, and in that recognition you have power. You pause. You step back. You remind yourself that your role is not to control the outcome. Your role is to control your actions. And once you return to that focus, the pressure disappears. You act better. You think clearer. You feel stronger. Because you are no longer carrying the weight of things you cannot control. This is the ultimate shift. From needing outcomes to choosing actions. From seeking validation to embodying value. From being controlled by circumstances to controlling your response to them. And once you reach this level, life becomes simpler. Not easier, but clearer. Because now you know exactly where your power lies. And you no longer give it away. Chapter 6. There comes a point in your transformation where the external world stops being your biggest challenge. It is no longer people, situations, or circumstances that disturb you the most. It is your own sensitivity to them. The way opinions affect you. The way criticism lingers in your mind. The way a single comment can change your mood, your confidence, your entire day. And, until you master this, your value will always remain unstable. Because if someone else can influence how you feel about yourself, they hold power over you. Most people live like this without questioning it. They adjust their behavior based on what others might think. They hesitate before speaking, not because they lack ideas, but because they fear judgment. They hold back from opportunities because they are afraid of failing publicly. They shape their identity around acceptance, and slowly they lose their originality. This is how self-suppression begins, not through force, but through fear. Fear of being judged, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being disliked. And the more you try to avoid these fears, the more control they gain over you. To become mentally unshakable, you must confront a truth that most people avoid their entire lives. Not everyone will like you. Not everyone will understand you, and not everyone will respect you. No matter what you do, this is not pessimism. It is reality. And once you accept this fully, something shifts inside you. You stop trying to control how you are perceived, because you realize it is impossible. People see you through their own lens, their experiences, their insecurities, their expectations. Two people can look at the same version of you and form completely different opinions. One may respect you. Another may dislike you. And both are based on their perspective, not your reality. So why would you build your identity on something so inconsistent? This is where most people lose themselves. They try to become a version of themselves that fits everyone's expectations, but that version does not exist. And in trying to create it, they become fragmented, a different personality for different people. A different behavior for different situations, and over time they lose clarity on who they really are. Mental strength begins with rejecting this pattern. You stop adapting your identity for approval. You start defining it for yourself. This does not mean you ignore feedback or become arrogant. It means you filter it. You evaluate it based on its source and its relevance. Not every opinion deserves your attention. Not every criticism deserves your energy. There is a difference between constructive feedback and noise. Constructive feedback comes from people who understand, who have experience, who genuinely want to see you improve. Noise comes from people projecting their own limitations, their own insecurities, their own unprocessed thoughts. If you treat both the same, you will confuse yourself. And confusion weakens your confidence. Mentally unshakable individuals are selective about what they internalize. They listen, but they do not absorb everything. They observe, but they do not react to everything. They choose what enters their mind, and that choice protects their stability. Another important shift is how you interpret criticism. Most people take it personally. They see it as an attack on their identity, and this creates defensiveness, insecurity, or self-doubt. But when you are mentally strong, you separate yourself from the criticism. You analyze it objectively. Is there truth in it? If yes, you use it to improve. If no, you discard it without emotional involvement. This requires discipline. Because your natural instinct is to react, to defend, to justify, but every time you resist that instinct, you strengthen your control. And control builds confidence. There is also something powerful about becoming comfortable with being misunderstood. This is one of the highest levels of mental strength, because most people desperately want to be understood. They explain themselves repeatedly. They try to clarify every action. They seek agreement. But the truth is, not everyone will understand you. And that is fine. You are not here to be understood by everyone. You are here to be aligned with yourself. When you reach this level, you stop over-explaining. You stop defending your decisions unnecessarily. You let your actions speak over time. And this creates a different kind of respect, not immediate, but lasting. Because people trust consistency more than explanations. Another key element is emotional independence. This is where your mood, your energy, your confidence are no longer dependent on external validation. You do not feel high because someone praised you. You do not feel low because someone criticized you. You remain stable. Not numb, but balanced. This balance allows you to function effectively in any environment. Whether you are appreciated or ignored, whether you are supported or challenged, you remain the same, and that consistency builds a reputation. People begin to see you as reliable, grounded, unpredictable in reaction, but predictable in values, and that combination commands respect. There will be moments where your mind tries to pull you back, moments where you overthink what someone said, moments where you replay conversations, moments where you feel the urge to seek reassurance. This is normal, but the difference now is awareness. You catch yourself. You interrupt the pattern. You remind yourself that your value is not determined by someone else's opinion. And slowly, those patterns lose strength. Another powerful shift is detaching from the need to be liked. This is not about becoming unkind. It is about becoming honest. When you are not trying to be liked, you speak more clearly. You set boundaries more firmly. You express yourself more authentically. And while this may reduce your appeal to some people, it increases your respect among the right ones. Because authenticity is rare, and rare qualities attract attention. At this stage, you begin to realize something important. You do not need everyone. You only need the right people. And the right people are not attracted to a version of you that is trying to please everyone. They are attracted to a version of you that is real. This realization simplifies your life. You stop chasing. You stop proving. You stop adjusting unnecessarily. And you start living with clarity. Clarity of thought, clarity of action, clarity of identity. And that clarity creates competence that cannot be shaken easily, because it is not based on external factors. It is built internally. There is also a level of peace that comes with this. When you are no longer trying to control how others see you, your mind becomes quieter. You stop overanalyzing. You stop second-guessing. You stop carrying unnecessary mental weight. And that mental space allows you to focus on what truly matters: your growth, your goals, your standards. This is where your energy becomes efficient. You are no longer wasting it on things that do not contribute to your progress. And that efficiency accelerates your development. At this level, you are no longer easily influenced. Opinions do not shake you. Criticism does not break you. Rejection does not define you, because you have built something stronger than all of that. A stable sense of self. And once you have that, everything else becomes easier to handle. You move with confidence. You speak with clarity. You act with intention, not because you are trying to prove something, but because you know who you are, and that knowing is unshakable. Chapter 7. At this stage, something begins to shift in a way that is both subtle and powerful. Your internal standards are no longer just thoughts. They start reflecting in your behavior, your decisions, and, most importantly, your relationships. Because no matter how strong your mindset becomes, your environment will always test it. The people you allow into your life will either reinforce your value or slowly erode it. Most people never consciously choose their relationships. They inherit them from proximity, convenience, history, or emotional attachment. And because of this, they end up surrounded by individuals who do not align with their growth. People who drain their energy, disrespect their time, or keep them anchored to an older version of themselves. And the problem is not always obvious. It is not always loud toxicity or clear negativity. Sometimes it is subtle. It is the friend who only reaches out when they need something. It is the person who minimizes your progress. It is the environment where your ambition feels uncomfortable. It is the conversation that constantly revolves around things that do not add value to your life. Individually, these may seem small, but collectively they shape your reality, because your environment influences your standards more than you realize. If you are constantly around people who lack discipline, your discipline weakens. If you are surrounded by people who avoid responsibility, your sense of accountability fades. If you are in spaces where mediocrity is normal, excellence begins to feel unnecessary. And slowly, without noticing, you adjust. This is why boundaries are not optional. They are essential. But most people misunderstand boundaries. They think boundaries are about controlling others. They are not. Boundaries are about controlling your access. Who gets your time? Who gets your energy? Who gets your attention? And at what level? When you start valuing yourself, your boundaries naturally become stronger. You no longer feel obligated to attend every gathering. You no longer respond to every message immediately. You no longer engage in conversations that drain you. And most importantly, you no longer tolerate behavior that disrespects you. This is where the real test begins. Because the moment you start setting boundaries, people will react. Some will question you. Some will push against your limits. some will try to make you feel guilty. Not because you are wrong, but because your boundaries disrupt their expectations. They were used to a version of you that was more accessible, more agreeable, more flexible. And now that version is changing. This is where many people collapse. They feel the discomfort, they feel the tension, and they go back to their old behavior just to restore peace. But that peace is temporary, and it comes at the cost of your self-respect. You have to understand something clearly. Every time you break your own boundary to make someone else comfortable, you weaken your identity. And every time you hold your boundary, even when it is uncomfortable, you strengthen it. Consistency is what makes boundaries effective, not intensity. You don't need to be aggressive. You don't need to explain excessively. You simply need to be clear and consistent, and over time, people adjust. They learn how to treat you based on what you allow. There is also an important shift in how you view relationships. You stop seeing them as something to maintain at all costs, and you start seeing them as something to evaluate. Does this person respect my time? Do they add value to my life? Do they align with my standards? Do I feel better after interacting with them, or drained? These questions change everything, because now you are not just participating in relationships. You are selecting them, and selection creates quality. High-value relationships are not built on constant communication or forced effort. They are built on mutual respect, alignment, and understanding. There is no pressure to perform, no need to impress, no fear of being yourself, because both individuals operate from a place of self-respect. And that creates stability. In contrast, low-value relationships are often based on dependency. One person needs attention, the other needs validation. And both are operating from a lack. This creates imbalance. And imbalance leads to tension. When you start valuing yourself, you naturally move away from these dynamics. Not because you are rejecting people, but because you are choosing alignment, and alignment is non-negotiable. There is also something important about letting go. Many people hold on to relationships far longer than they should. Not because they are beneficial, but because they are familiar. History creates attachment. But history alone is not a reason to continue. If a relationship no longer aligns with who you are becoming, it will hold you back. And letting go becomes necessary. This is not easy, because letting go creates space, and space can feel uncomfortable. But that space is where growth happens. It allows new, aligned connections to enter your life. It allows you to focus on yourself without distraction. It allows you to rebuild your standards without compromise. Another shift that happens at this level is how you handle access. Not everyone deserves the same level of access to you. Some people belong in your inner circle, some in your outer circle, and some do not belong at all. Understanding this hierarchy protects your energy. Because when you give everyone full access, you expose yourself to unnecessary influence, and influence shapes behavior. By controlling access, you control your environment, and by controlling your environment, you control your growth. There is also a powerful concept called energy exchange. Every interaction you have either gives you energy or takes it away. Some people leave you feeling motivated, focused, clear. Others leave you feeling drained, distracted, confused. Pay attention to this, because it tells you everything you need to know. And once you become aware of it, you cannot ignore it. You start making different choices. You invest more in relationships that elevate you. You reduce exposure to those that drain you. And over time, your entire environment shifts. This shift is not immediate. It takes time. It requires difficult decisions. It requires letting go of comfort. But the result is worth it. A life where your environment supports your growth instead of resisting it. A circle where your standards are normal, not questioned. A space where you can operate at your highest level without compromise. At this stage, you are no longer reacting to your environment. You are creating it. And that is a position of power. Because now your growth is not dependent on external factors, it is supported by them. There will still be moments of doubt, moments where you question your decisions, moments where you feel the pull of old connections. That is normal. But you remind yourself why you started. You remind yourself what you are building. And you stay consistent, because consistency is what turns decisions into identity. And identity shapes your entire life. By now, you are not the same person you were at the beginning. Your standards have changed. Your mindset has evolved. Your behavior is different, and your environment is starting to reflect that. This is the process. Not quick, not easy, but effective. And once you reach this level, you realize something important. You no longer need to chase respect. You have built a life that demands it naturally. Chapter 8. At this point, you are no longer the same person who started this journey. The way you think has changed. The way you respond has evolved. The way you see yourself is no longer dependent on others. And because of that, something powerful begins to happen. You stop focusing only on protecting your value, and you start using it. Because value, when fully developed, is not meant to stay internal. It is meant to be expressed through direction, through action, through the way you shape your life. This is where most people stop short. They build awareness, they improve their mindset, they set boundaries, but they never translate that into something meaningful. They remain stable but not impactful, and stability without direction leads to stagnation. You don't just want peace, you want progress. You don't just want self-respect, you want results. You don't just want clarity, you want movement. This is where purpose comes in, not as something abstract or philosophical, but as something practical. Purpose is not a single grand mission that suddenly appears. It is built through alignment between what you value, what you are skilled at, and what you consistently act on. It is created, not discovered. Most people wait to feel ready before they take action. They wait for clarity, confidence, or the perfect opportunity. But readiness is not a prerequisite. It is a result. You become ready by moving, not by waiting. When you start taking action, even imperfectly, you create momentum, and momentum builds confidence faster than any amount of thinking ever will. Because now, you are not just imagining a better version of yourself, you are becoming it. There is also something important about direction. Without direction, even strong individuals become distracted. They have energy, but no focus. They have potential, but no structure. And without structure, potential is wasted. Direction does not mean having everything planned. It means having a clear standard for how you operate daily. It means knowing what you are moving toward, even if the path is not fully defined. This is where discipline becomes essential, not as restriction, but as alignment. Discipline is what keeps your actions consistent with your standards, even when motivation fades, because motivation is temporary. It comes and goes, but discipline creates stability. It ensures that you continue moving forward regardless of how you feel, and once discipline becomes part of your identity, everything changes. You stop relying on mood, you stop making excuses. You stop delaying action. You become someone who executes. And execution is what separates those who think from those who achieve. There is also a shift in how you view time. You no longer treat it casually. You understand that time is your most limited resource, and the way you spend it determines the quality of your life. So you become intentional. You invest time in things that build you: skills, knowledge, health, purposeful work. You reduce time spent on things that only provide temporary comfort: distraction, unnecessary conversations, mindless consumption. This is not about eliminating enjoyment. It is about prioritizing growth, because long-term satisfaction always outweighs short-term pleasure. Another important element is responsibility. At this level, you stop blaming external factors for your situation. You take full ownership of your decisions, of your actions, of your outcomes. This does not mean everything is your fault. It means everything is your responsibility. And that mindset gives you power, because if you are responsible, you are also capable of change. You are not waiting for circumstances to improve. You are creating improvement through your actions. There is also something powerful about becoming results-oriented, not in a way that creates pressure, but in a way that creates clarity. You focus on outcomes, but you are not attached to them. You measure progress. You adjust your approach. You refine your strategy. And over time, you improve, because growth is not random. It is a result of consistent evaluation and adjustment. At this stage, your confidence becomes visible, not through words, but through results, through the way you carry yourself, through the way you handle challenges, through the way you move with purpose. And people notice this. They may not understand your journey, but they see the outcome, and that creates respect, not because you demanded it, but because you earned it. There is also a deeper level of fulfillment that begins to emerge, because now your life is not just about avoiding negativity or protecting your energy. It is about building something meaningful, something that reflects your values, something that gives your efforts direction. This could be your career, your work, your impact on others, your contribution to something larger than yourself. And this is where true satisfaction comes from. Not from comfort, but from progress. From knowing that you are moving forward, that you are evolving, that you are becoming more than you were yesterday. There will still be challenges. Moments where things don't go as planned, moments where you feel pressure, moments where you question your direction. But now you handle them differently. You don't collapse, you adjust. You don't avoid, you confront. You don't stop, you continue. Because your identity is no longer fragile. It is built on discipline, clarity, and self-respect. And that foundation does not break easily. At this level, you also begin to influence others. Not by trying to, but by example. People observe your behavior, your consistency, your standards, and it impacts them, because real influence is not forced. It is demonstrated. And when people see someone who truly values themselves, who moves with purpose, who operates with discipline, it creates a reaction. Some will feel inspired, some will feel challenged, some will distance themselves, and that is fine. Because your goal is not to control reactions, your goal is to stay aligned. There is also a sense of independence that becomes permanent. You are no longer dependent on motivation. You are no longer dependent on validation. You are no longer dependent on external structure. You have built internal structure, and that makes you self-sufficient. Not isolated, but independent. And independence is one of the highest forms of value, because it allows you to operate freely, to make decisions without fear. to pursue goals without hesitation, to live on your own terms. This is the final transformation, from someone who was seeking value to someone who embodies it. From someone who was reacting to life to someone who is directing it. From someone who needed approval to someone who operates with certainty. And once you reach this point, everything changes, not because the world is different, but because you are, and that difference shapes everything you experience. So from here forward, the question is no longer, how do I become valuable? That question has been answered. The real question now is, what will you do with it? Your audiobook is now structurally Chapter 9. There is a moment after everything you've understood, everything you've felt, everything you started to change, where you realize something quietly powerful. Nothing outside of you was ever the real problem. Not people, not circumstances, not timing. It was the version of you that kept accepting less than you deserved. And now that version is gone. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough that you can see the difference. Enough that you can feel it in your decisions, in your silence, in the way you walk away from things that once held you captive. You are no longer unaware. And awareness changes everything, because once you see your patterns clearly, you cannot return to them without feeling the weight of it. You cannot tolerate the same disrespect without noticing it. You cannot ignore your own needs without feeling the disconnect. And that discomfort is not a weakness, it is a signal that you are no longer the same. But here is where most people make their final mistake. They think understanding is enough. They believe that because they feel different, their life will automatically become different. But feeling is not transformation. Action is. And not one action, repeated action. Consistent action, action that aligns with everything you now know. Because knowledge without execution creates frustration. You know what to do, but you don't do it. You see your value, but you don't act like it. You recognize your patterns, but you repeat them. And this creates internal conflict, the kind that drains you, the kind that makes you feel stuck, even when you have clarity. So the real challenge is not learning. It is applying daily. Even when it is inconvenient, even when it is uncomfortable, even when no one is watching, because the life you want is not built in moments of motivation. It is built in moments of discipline, the small decisions, the quiet choices, the times where you could go back to your old self, but you don't. This is where identity is reinforced, and identity is everything. Because once something becomes your identity, it no longer requires effort. It becomes natural. You don't force boundaries, you live them. You don't try to act confident. You operate with certainty. You don't remind yourself of your value, you embody it. But getting there requires consistency, and consistency requires commitment. Not temporary, not conditional, but absolute. You make a decision, a clear internal decision, that no matter what happens, you will not go back to undervaluing yourself. Not for comfort, not for approval, not for temporary connection, because you now understand the cost. And it is too high. There will be moments where it feels easier to go back. To say yes when you mean no, to tolerate what you should reject, to seek validation when you feel uncertain. That pull will exist, because habits do not disappear overnight. But every time you resist it, you become stronger. Every time you choose differently, you create distance from your old self, and over time, that distance becomes permanent. You evolve, not suddenly, but steadily. There is also something important about patience. Transformation is not instant. You will not wake up tomorrow as a completely different person. but you will be slightly better, and if you continue, that slight improvement compounds. Day by day, decision by decision, until one day you look back and realize you are no longer who you used to be, and that realization is powerful, because it is real, not imagined, not forced, earned. This is where true confidence comes from, not from thinking highly of yourself without reason, but from knowing what you have built, knowing the discipline you have developed, knowing the standards you have maintained, knowing the decisions you have made when it would have been easier not to. That is unshakable, because it is based on reality, not opinion. At this point, your life begins to reflect your internal change. Your environment improves, your relationships become more aligned, your time becomes more valuable, your focus becomes sharper. Not because things magically changed, but because you did. And that change influenced everything around you. There is also a deeper sense of peace. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer in conflict with yourself. You are aligned. Your actions match your standards. Your decisions reflect your values. And that alignment removes a level of stress most people carry their entire lives. You are no longer pretending. You are no longer performing. You are simply being, and that is freedom. Real freedom, not the kind that comes from external success, but the kind that comes from internal stability, from knowing that no matter what happens, you will not abandon yourself, that you will not lower your standards, that you will not trade your self-respect for temporary comfort. This is the ultimate form of value, and very few people reach it, because it requires honesty, discipline, consistency, and the willingness to stand alone when necessary. But once you reach it, everything changes. You no longer chase. You attract. You no longer prove. You demonstrate. You no longer seek value. You are it. So now, as you reach the end of this journey, there is only one thing left to decide. Will this remain something you listen to, or will it become something you live? Because the difference between those two is everything. One gives you temporary motivation, the other gives you permanent transformation. And that choice is entirely yours.